Bienvenidos a todos y a todas. Tenemos traducción simultánea, así que pueden elegir el canal de la traducción en inglés o en castellano en el icono de interpretación que encuentran en su barra inferior del Zoom.
Thank you very much. So can we all please get into the right channel now? Thank you. English or Spanish? Hello, I'm in an English channel. So would you like to, can we kick off, please? Liv?
Yes, I think it's time to kick off. Hello and welcome to this event arranged by the Design Literacy International Network. And a special warm welcome to today's presenter, Joyce Koo. My name is Liv Merete Nielsen from Oslo Metropolitan University. Just a little about the network. We created this network in London in 2019 to open up for a wide discussion on the role of design education for a better tomorrow. In order to move in such a direction, we wanted to share ideas with design researchers, college in different parts of the world. So the first Tuesday every month, we arrange digital events like today, and it's open for everyone. To move in direction of a better tomorrow, we need skilled and critical designers. We also need a skilled and critical general public in their position as politicians, consumers, users, and clients. Designers and non-designers will need to be involved, skilled, and critical in order to cooperate. We are building upon the ideas, writings, and practice of the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire from the 1970s. Then reading and writing was on the agenda. We have added design to meet today's challenges. Design and making is of increased importance for democratic participation, diversity, and equity in society, all in perspective of a greener future. Through these events, it's our hope to open up for different perspectives on design literacy, both for professional designers and for the general public. And now Ursula will give a short introduction of today's presenters. So please, Ursula, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Liv. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ursula Bravo from Universidad del Desarrollo in Chile. Before introducing Professor Koo, I would like to acknowledge the Communication and Research Department of the School of Design to disseminate and translate this talk. So Paulina, Feña, Pia, and Jasmine, thanks for your kind support. As a member of the Design Literacy International Network, I feel very proud to have Dr. Joyce Koo as a speaker today. Dr. Joyce Koo is an associate professor at the Higher Education Development Center of the University of Otago in New Zealand. Her research interests are in design thinking in education and teacher professional development. She has published more than 50 peer-reviewed journal articles and currently serves as a senior associate editor of the Asia Pacific Education Research Journal. I came across her work when I began my PhD in education. I was interested in design-based approaches in school settings. Many research papers showed experiences using design to solve pedagogical problems. Most of them use the design thinking models developed by this school and IDEO, but few included design as a theoretical framework. As a designer, I was particularly interested in educators' notion of design. In Professor Koo's book, I found an interesting introduction about design thinking, and 21st century skills, which provide an excellent common framework that could guide the interdisciplinary collaboration between designers and educators. Welcome, Professor Koo, and thanks for accepting to deliver this talk. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Ursula. And good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to this talk. It's my pleasure to do this for the Design DLN network. So it's interesting to know of this network that promotes design. And I think design has always been something pretty close to me. So I think I'll start by sharing my screen, and then we'll go on with the talk. Okay, so the topic of my talk today is design thinking and 21st century learning. So we like to talk about design competencies and challenges for teachers. So a little bit about myself. First, my professional experience, as you can see, I started off in industry as an instructional designer. So instructional designers are something like learning designers, is what we call today. The term always changes. So we design things like e-learning, training packages, learning experiences. So I got into academia in 2008. I was in Singapore. So this is a teacher education institution. It's the only institution in Singapore that trains and certifies teachers for K-12 schools. So here I was doing in the Learning Sciences and Technologies department. My job was to teach teachers how to integrate technology into their teaching. So it's educational technology. So currently I'm at the University of Otago in New Zealand. So if you haven't heard of the University of Otago, just a bit of history, it's the oldest university in New Zealand. We just celebrated our 150th anniversary 2 years ago. And that's my department. So we are a teaching and learning center. But what is unique about this center is that we are faculty members teaching and researching in higher education. So higher education is different than K-12 education. So in K-12, we are dealing with teachers who teach students in schools. But in higher education, we deal with all the lecturers. That means all other people that, whether you're teaching in the polytechnic or university or vocational, institutions, we are doing development of those teachers. But in my center, what's unique is that we don't just take care of the teachers. There's another part of us that does student learning development. So we cover things like learning skills, support skills, all sorts of skills that students need in order to be successful in learning. Yeah, so this is one of the oldest teaching and learning centers in the world. It's about 40 years in history that we just celebrated. So that's a little bit about my background. So that's why I'm interested in design thinking, because design has always been what I have been involved in, whether in the corporate or as a teacher. I was also teaching students how to design different kinds of lessons, for students that use technology. And now in higher education is the same, is teaching teachers how to design. I'm not too much involved in the student learning development. So I'm still very much focused on teacher development. So it's in this context that, why I'm quite interested in design thinking, but also other things. If you look at other interests, is about 21st century learning and also this thing called TPAC. Not sure if you have heard it about this model, but I'll cover a little bit about it. Yeah, so diving into today's talk about 21st century skills, I think that's the thing, especially if you are a school teacher in K-12 schools. We are all very concerned about this future work skills. How do we prepare our children so that they have the kind of skills that is needed for the workplace of the future? So if you read some, there are many frameworks about 21st century skills. OECD has a set of competencies. PS21 is another one, and another one is engage. But then I put another etc. because every country, mostly in the world, their Ministry of Education have kind of got some kind of definition of 21st century skills. So it's about future work skills. And basically, if I were to summarize, looking at those different frameworks, those skills are pretty generic. It's talking about people having social cultural awareness, being able to work with people, and also people being able to go through different cultures and be comfortable in navigating, communication in a cultural context. Then there's the cognitive part, which is very important, critical thinking, that sort of skills. Metacognition, not only able to think, but able to think about what I'm thinking. So you're able to step back and say, hey, is what I'm doing the right process or not? Able to self-evaluate. So that's a deeper kind of thinking. Then productivity skills, knowing how to work through processes, like what Eric said. How would a teacher actually communicate with students and manage all the workload that comes with the different kinds of online learning platforms that we now need to manage. So those are productivity skills, and definitely technology. We can't escape from it, but 21st century frameworks really talks about a person knowing different kinds of technology, but knowing which technology to use at what time. So I think especially nowadays, we all know lots of technology, but we may not know like what's the best kind of technology to use at a certain point. So with this, that challenges teachers to think about what is 21st century learning. Okay, so I would like to distinguish this from 21st century skills, because 21st century learning is that what kind of learning experience do we as teachers need to give students in the school so that we prepare them with 21st century skills? So why 21st century learning? Because if you're going to teach the way that we learn maybe many, I don't know, like the last century, like in big classrooms and then just sitting there listening to your teacher, the students are not going to learn much of 21st century skills. So then 21st century learning means that, what can we do such that students can start practicing these kinds of skills even in school, so that by the time they get to work, they are prepared with those skills. So it's not that they start learning all these things when suddenly they need to work, or you push them in the university to develop such skills. So then that got people thinking about what's the meaning of 21st century learning. So one of the frameworks that I draw upon a lot in the research that I do is this meaningful learning with technology by Jonathan. So what Jonathan is talking about is that if you want 21st century skills, then learning has to be, you can't really escape with learning from technology. You can't really pull out technology from the classroom. But then if you were to use technology in the classroom, is it just about showing YouTube videos and that sort of thing? But it has to be a different kind of experience where students are using technology in ways that are listed there. Active, constructive, meaning using technology to interpret and make meaning. Authentic users of technology, using technology to collaborate, and also using technology in intentional ways, meaning that it's a bit of supporting the metacognition, supporting them to know how to set goals and be intentional about their own learning. So these sorts of learning experiences, when you have them in schools, they can better support students to develop the 21st century skills that are needed in the workplace. Yep, but then with 21st century learning, it presents teachers with a design problem, because then how do you actually develop them? Because in schools, especially in like K-12 schools, there are standard ways of teaching everything. Teachers, that it's so well trained. Like if you want to teach fractions, there's a certain method. If you want to teach, I don't know, physics, there's a certain method. So then 21st century, it's like this other thing that needs to be integrated. But then if you notice the 21st century skills, they are all soft skills. It's not subject skills. Whereas the curriculum in schools, it's all program underlying, like what do you need to learn for maths and science and everything. It's all professional and I would say subject skills. Then teachers have not much time for all the soft skills. So where are we going to squeeze the time out? You can't like have a course and say, okay, I'm teaching you all the 21st century skills now. So you learn critical thinking and all that. Because all those skills do not exist in a vacuum, but they need to be integrated and used as a way to approach how we solve problems. So then the issue with teachers is that, okay, if you want 21st century skills, how am I going to integrate it with my subject teaching? And so that comes the problem. Yeah, because the subject teaching is not designed in that way. I think even in university, we have certain ways, but then it may or may not, really have the 21st century skills. Then the teacher has a problem. How do I design 21st century learning then? So that is the teacher's design problem, and it becomes my design problem when I become a teacher educator. So when I was in the teachers institution, we talk about, okay, how do you get them to teach with 21st century, teach in ways that support 21st century learning. But, in higher education, we don't really talk about 21st century learning because higher education, we are more about professional skills. And usually people enter higher education, whether you are in medicine or design or something, you're learning to be a professional, more for work. So in higher education, it's more about student-centered learning, because higher education, the problem is a bit different. We are all very much in the tradition of lecture, tutorial. Every university is kind of like that. So when we say the lecture, it's like, like what I'm doing now, like as if like I'm the expert. I give you, I push down my knowledge to you, I transmit. So, but higher education also has its challenges. Given this kind of structures, how do we become more student-centered? So I think it may not be totally similar. I mean, it's not to argue what is what, but I guess in higher education, it's more about student-centered learning. And also in some institutions, we call those things like graduate attributes. So what kind of attributes do we want our graduates to have? Okay, so, but it's definitely is the same problem about not being a transmission kind of teacher, about giving those sorts of experiences that develop 21st century skill. So as a teacher, I have this design problem. So how we thought about the design problem actually moved along the years. So it's not just my work, but I work with a group of researchers, with research collaborators that are listed, in the book publications and also in journal publications. So our thinking about this design problem has shifted through the years. So from 2010 to 2012, we started the first part, which is like, hey, is it about giving teachers better pedagogical knowledge? So if you look on the TPAC model, which is on my right, okay, so the circles, actually that is a major framework in educational technology, because we are talking about like, what do we teach teachers? Actually teachers, Mishra and Kayla, who developed this model, they are suggesting that teachers have three kinds of knowledge. And if you want them to use technology well, it has to be an integration of technology, pedagogy, and content. So it's not about whether the teacher knows a lot, which is their content knowledge, but a teacher must be able to integrate. So I must have the knowledge to teach and my subject knowledge. And then when they intersect, you see that green part there, it becomes all the ways that I can teach. That's different from my knowledge of the subject, because pedagogical content knowledge is about like, if I teach students who are doing very well, there's one way to teach them the same subject. But if I'm teaching like struggling students who are not doing well, there's another way to teach that same content. So pedagogical content knowledge is that unique knowledge that teachers have to deal with different kinds of teaching situations and students. So, but if you bring in technology, then actually teachers need TPAC, which is technological pedagogical content knowledge. So that it means that I can intersect my technology. It's not how much I know about technology, but whether I know how to use technology in the context of for that subject, and with a particular way of using technology. So how I use technology for inquiry can be different from how I use technology, for just collaboration. So that is the kind of knowledge we need to teach. And that's the knowledge that actually in a teacher institution, teachers college, that's what we are teaching in all these things about the subject courses. Whether you learn how to teach maths, for example, you're learning lots of PCK. But us in teaching educational technology, we need to teach them the TPAC. So how then do we integrate, 21st century learning? So we thought that maybe it's about new pedagogical knowledge. So this on the left is Jonason's model. So Jonason looks at the 5 dimensions, and Jonason's conception of 21st century learning is things like if students are manipulating things with technology, so they may use, say, simulations where they manipulate, different kinds of scenarios with the technology, or students are articulating and reflecting with technology, collaborating and conversing with technology, looking at complex, authentic situations through technology, reflecting and regulating their thinking and intentions with technology. So these are the different kind of pedagogical dimensions that we need to kind of stick it into the teacher's pedagogical knowledge. So that's how we visualize this problem in initial stages. So we tried to do that, and then we taught Jonason's model, we taught them stuff. Then we looked at our students' lesson plans and we were like, look, I don't think they really got it, because they were still, we didn't see much pedagogical change. Some kind of change, like, for example, they'll say, oh, okay, so now we need collaborative learning. So I'm going to put the students into groups, for example. But the kind of group work they gave students to do were like, okay, it's still the normal type of work, just except that the students did it in pairs. But that is not really the spirit of 21st century learning, because if you look at those dimensions, actually talking about complex problem solving, creating more open-ended problems for students to collaborate and work on that sort of problems. It's not about taking your same worksheet in fractions or like just doing the same kind of fractions with one standard answer and then getting the students like you sit in pairs and do it. So when we did just teach pedagogical knowledge, that's the typical kind of lesson plans we got back from students. That's not ideal, because they still didn't really get the spirit of it. So we said, okay, as a design problem, we need to rethink about our solution. So that brought us to the next thing. So we said maybe they didn't quite understand what exactly is what is this dimensions about. So we feel that well, we need to give them a rubric, okay, a rubric, because we find that students cannot differentiate the levels. So the dimensions are just flat, it's just one thing. But actually, when we looked at Jonason's dimensions, it actually can occur in different stages. So I'm just going to blow up one and explain. So we designed this rubric we took our students' lesson plans and then we kind of coded. So we coded and labeled every dimension from 0 to 4, whether there is the dimension, it's not there, or it's a very high level of that dimension. So from that, we developed this rubric. So for example, if the authentic dimension, if you're at level 0, you don't even talk about your subject in a real world context. So maybe a teacher will just say, oh, if you want to add fractions, it's 1/3 plus 1/4. Those are the steps you do it. They don't say what's the meaning of 1/3. They don't say what's the meaning of 1/4. They don't even like take a pizza or something, and then show like, this is 1/3 and 1/4 of a pizza. So if you don't even have anything, you're like level 0. So level 1 means you actually use ICT to have some real world representation. So that's the level that teachers typically do. They say, okay, you want authentic learning. Let me show students a YouTube video about something. So if I'm teaching something about physics, maybe I'll show a YouTube video about, say, a roller coaster and then explain the forces. And yeah, we say that's good, but that's not really a high level authenticity. So we call that level 1. And then if you start using ICT tools to have students investigate real world problems, and even have an activity that's anchored on investigating a real world problem. For example, you give them a simulation and you'd say that, someone needs to create a roller coaster. So now use that simulation and play with the permutations and try to, get, solve a certain problem where we need to design a certain roller coaster in a certain way. So that's when you say you're doing problems like that, that's a lot more authentic than just, I show you a YouTube video. So that's how we kind of try to map out for students, some kind of a vision, which we call pedagogical visioning, because a lot of times 21st century learning, these sorts of experience are not very common in schools, at least at that time. Maybe it's different now. So, when teachers don't have that experience, all they can do is to design based on what they've experienced. So you can't blame them for not being able to visualize, but when we are setting those pedagogical anchors, that's something we must help them to visualize. So this becomes a design scaffold. I think we debated a lot on this because that kind of contravenes the nature of design. We always think that design, you have to leave it to them. We be creative, you think, but then you need to have something to think about. So we thought that actually for these pre-service teachers who are not experienced in teaching, these are scaffolds. But then there's a lot of debate within the research team, like, what are you trying to give them some standards and everyone is just going to follow this and become blindly designed? But actually, when we tested this in schools, even the school teachers found it useful because they really have no vision. There's some vision is better than nothing. So their vision gives them something to think about. But then, so that's where we kind of say, okay, pedagogical visioning. Then, of course, there's the problem. You do not want people to use this as a simple blind map that, you want this, so I'm going to say level 2, level 3, and we just don't do this. That's not really design. Okay, so at this time too, we started to think about, hey, we also need to help teachers, design by helping them, giving them the heuristics to think about it. And it's also the design process that counts. So what we took was how do we get teachers to integrate and have pull out the different parts of their TPAC as they are designing. So we took a typical lesson design process, which is on the top, the gray here, which is a lesson design process. And we integrated the TPAC stuff into that. So all these are kind of guide questions to prompt and think, to force them to kind of think in a way that is kind of changing the way they think. So again, that's how we try to use this with the heuristics. And that's those two things, these heuristics and the rubrics are things that we use to try and change the way, and strengthen the way people do design. Okay, so from 2014 onwards, we felt like we need to think a lot harder about how is design taking place, because it's not just about knowing what to design, but how you design. And if you look at the left, this is a very typical lesson design process in school. But then we drew on the works of Donald Scone, Nigel Cross, and Keith Storrs. And we look at the feel that, this is the way that teachers are taught to design, but it looks very static and very procedural. But actually design, if you look at it, is exploration. It's a lot of abduction. It's sometimes you don't know where you're going, but you're figuring things out as you go. And it's a lot of reflective practice. It's intuitive. It's also iterative, and also depend on how you do your framing. So how you look at the problem determines how you come up with a solution. And it's a wicked problem as described, because different kinds of solutions are possible. But then they're all possible for solving the problem. But it's just that different solutions, when put into different contexts, some will be more effective or less effective. So we find like these kinds of processes must embody how people design, but it's really not really captured in the way it's, as teachers, we are told, write your learning objectives, develop your test, develop your strategy, develop this. Is like, okay, 1, 2, 3. But design doesn't go that way. And we find like there's a frustration among teachers in the sense that, if I design and then something doesn't work out right, when I go to class, then I must be a poor designer. But that's not the spirit of design, because design is about tinkering, is about finding solutions and then trying it and then keep on improving it. But we don't find that kind of spirit being captured in, the existing lesson processes. So when we looked at the design processes that are out there, even design thinking, we have another problem, because yes, you can empathize, define, prototype, these do not seem quite different. But then the different thing in learning and teaching is that there is a lot of technical skills involved in that. It is probably okay to use this general process when you are designing, say, a particular experience or product, but underlying design is also a lot of subject and technical knowledge. So for a teacher, all their professional knowledge is really all these things about knowing how to do the objectives, develop the tests and strategies. You can't divorce one from the other. You can't say that just because you use a particular design thinking process, you're going to solve your 21st century learning design problem. So then that is another issue that we thought. So in the end, we find that, hey, we got to come up with our own process of bringing the teacher through this whole 21st century design thinking. So what we did was to come up with this process by using the scaffolds that we already have. So we try to integrate reflection, thinking, goal setting, all those kind of design ways that designers actually have to think, set goals, and tinker and muddle through. So that's what we did. So first we used the rubrics. We got them to assess a current lesson plan. Then we got them to set some goals, which we call, the goals that you want. Do you want to, like, for each dimension, authentic? Do you want to move from level 0 to level 2 or whatever? So you try to describe, all the goals. And then we do a lot of co-designing. So as researchers, we'll go sit down with the teacher and we try to be the devil's advocate, because we find that teachers, designers can only design with whatever best they have. So if you put a group of teachers who have been like 20 years in that school, they will still design in the same way because that's the way that they have gotten it. So we find that it's very useful when researchers or someone from outside goes in and then messes up all their ideas, challenges them and say, hey, why can't you do it this way, that way, and all that? So number 3 is quite essential. And then we get them to implement the lessons, which is very much like what you do, like prototyping in designing. And then after they come back, they review and reflect, and then they set goals and they go on. So this is the process that we did for that we use with teacher development. So I'm going to show you some results, and then we've been doing this from 2015 onwards. So this is where from one Singapore primary school with 37 teachers, there were 7 design teams. We did this process across 1 year, and we looked at the lesson plan. So before the lesson, they all chose a lesson that they wanted to design. So we had 7 teams. So they were different subject groups like science department, maths department. This was the whole school, languages and all that. So everyone had lessons that they wanted to design. So when we looked at the before and after, and we looked at the rubric where we did inter-rater, and we did also like expert rating of the initial and final thing, we found that actually this process has good effects. So like for some of them, the effect sizes can be quite huge, but we find like there's still a challenge because lower primary, especially like maths, I think the maths teachers struggle a lot because maths, there's usually like in the primary school, there's a standard answer. So there's a bit of struggle there in terms of, 21st century learning. But largely for English, science and all that, we find like mostly are able to have good effect sizes with that. Then we also did this with teachers who are enrolled in a master's course. So these are usually head of departments for educational technology. They enroll in this master's course. So we tried this process too, and we also got good effect size in their lesson plan design. So meaning that through this process, they are able to create the pedagogical change towards 21st century learning. So, and the pedagogical change is evidenced in the things they design, the way they look at their lessons, and the kind of experiences that they can create. So the impact of this process, we have actually used it quite all over Singapore, actually, quite well received in Singapore. not only in the master's course, we have done it with school-based workshops to 200 in-service teachers, principals too. We have introduced this process, 149 of them, and also in higher education in fine arts, which is something quite arts. Usually they don't, like the performing arts and all that, where they try to integrate blended learning and technology. So then there's also higher education with 160 university lecturers. So that's what we've done. But the ongoing challenges with this whole process is that everything that teachers do, whether it's higher education or school, is very contextualized. So, the culture of your institution can affect you, what you can and cannot design or create certain barriers, physical, technological challenges, interpersonal, whether you have support from your HOD to do things like that. Because sometimes if the culture is not really supporting 21st century learning and you try to do something like that, you become different. So it's not only about you being able to do that design and create that design, but you also have to fight all the other contextual barriers to do things that you want. And also yourself, intrapersonal, your beliefs. Do you as a teacher, do you believe in the 21st century way of teaching? Or are you happier to be a traditional teacher? You're the best lecturer. You produce all your A students. So why do you need to change? So that's another struggle there. Okay, so with that, we tried also to code, teachers as they talk when they design together to understand how they design. And we find that this thing about framing is very important. When we looked at teachers, they look at this. These are the different frames or the ideas that are the ways that they can look at problem. So teachers, when they design, they actually just keep talking about ideas. They keep generating, clarifying, and evaluating ideas. But then they also have this management frame where they say, okay, the goal is I need to do this and that. So they need to establish design goals and produce artifacts and processes. But how do teachers design? They actually have different perceptions of students. So a teacher can perceive things in different ways. A teacher may say like this problem, it's because the students are not good. They are just weak. They can't do this. But another teacher may say, it's not that, it's maybe I can change the way I teach so that, it's not about the students' personalities or problems, but about, how I change my processes. So depending on how they perceive the problem, they can come up with different solutions. Teachers also enact. So how do they decide whether something is a good or not? They try to replay a classroom episode. Then they will say something like, if I do this in class, this student is going to do this, I'm going to have this problem and that. So they try to rehearse. There's also institutional frame. They will say, oops, the syllabus, the requirement, the school, whatever the schools and all that. All these things come into their mind and they can encourage or they can hinder. They also try to draw upon theories and like learning theories and things like that. But usually they don't really do much of that. Most of the time they do a lot of ideas. They do a lot of enactment and perceptions. Then there's also interpersonal, where they can talk to their peers about the problem. So teachers have a routine expertise. There are certain ways that they are already successful. So for them to change their design to 21st century learning, if they are already not along that way, it's as if I'm telling the teacher, like, throw away all your 20 years of experience, throw away all the ways that you've been successful, try a new way. It is quite horrible to teachers. It's very hard to change. So in design thinking for education, it's not just about helping them to design better. The problem is more and more about, like, how do I deal with that? What's up here? What's already, programmed up here? So that is the big challenge when we are doing that. And in the higher education context, I find like it's having to work with each individual lecturer in terms of their individual conceptual change based on where they are at now. So in this study where I looked at faculty, trying to mentor them in integrating technology, there are different people that need different strategies. So like technology modeling is for those faculty who are very tech phobic. They've never not really used technology, but now there's no choice because everything is online and they are more and more pressured. So with these people, I can't really push them to the to the very tail end of 21st century learning or student-centered learning. I have to start them from very simple technology modeling. Even if they are able to do something like, in Zoom, just incorporate a polling and do something like that instead of lecturing for 3 hours, that is a big change already. Because for those lecturers, that's the way they've been doing. You can't expect them to jump all the way to the other deep end to do problem-based learning, for example. So for them, they need to start here. Then you have those that have already done something. They might have done Kahoots in class and all that. And those lecturers are usually searching for like, what's the next best tool that I can do? But those people, they need a bit of refinement in terms of their PCK or the way they teach. So they are not understanding student-centered learning or like 21st century learning types of models. They are still quite transmission-based. So you need to, but they are open to change because they already tried some Kahoots and that sort of thing. So for those teachers, you need to start first by, changing the mindset, telling them like student-centered learning means deep learning, means authentic learning, means that sort of thing. And once they've got those things, and then you have to try to ask them, can you stretch a little bit, do a little bit of, say, team-based learning or a bit of problem-based learning, have a bit of open-ended problems for your students to solve. And, don't just think about technology tools, think about also the processes and the problems underlying how you use technology. So that sort, they need a lot of pedagogical modeling in order to see a new pedagogical model and start moving to student-centered learning. Then you have those who are already very deep, those who are already like the innovators, already there. So with that group is like, you can challenge them, and what they want to do is really to refine their processes. So this group might have tried a bit of problem-based learning, but some parts are not working well. So that's the group where you can deepen and push further, but then help them to improve all their instructional processes. So it's deepening practice for them. Yeah, so these are the ongoing challenges that my design problem is not resolved. So when you ask yourself what exactly is design thinking in education, I would say something like, well, if a school doesn't have enough bandwidth or enough iPads for every student to work on an activity, a teacher A and B has different reaction. Teacher A will say, well, maybe I can go about that problem by converting individual work to group work. The other teacher B say, we just can't do this activity. So I mean, in your mind, which teacher has better design thinking? That is really the difference in it. Because at the end, I feel that design thinking is about your disposition, but design can be uncomfortable because design dispositions, if we look at literature, is really about this: being comfortable with uncertainty, being open to new experiences, exploring conflicting ideas, deviating from established practices, comfortable with occasional failure. That can be very terrible in a school. I know, like, especially in high stakes systems, like in Singapore, what do you mean failure? It means like what? Instead of 100% of my students scoring A, I'm going to get only 90% scoring A. Is that acceptable? How do I account to parents? Because, it's high stakes, and for example, in more high stakes systems, how do you actually account for all this? Are you sure you can have that occasional failure? That might not be, very well received. So design can be dangerous in that sense. We have to work that out. You must be constantly seeking to turn constraints into opportunities. So with that, it also affects how you do your lesson design. You play with different lesson ideas. You allow conflicting ideas to continue until you think you've fully understood the problem. You continue to refine your ideas by understanding and continue to learn. You consider the consequences of adopting particular lesson ideas before working out its details. So remember that when you do all this, you have to manage all these contextual concerns, school policies, parental reactions, and, all those things. And then if needed, you completely change your lesson ideas. These sorts of practices and dispositions, they take time. You need to manage consequences sometimes. So how do you manage all this? It requires some kind of dispositions. And some teachers are really just not comfortable doing that, because some people are just more comfortable doing the same thing, or repeating, or maybe adapting a little bit, but not with this kind of thing. Design can be dangerous. Okay, so one day you can wake up and you say, well, everything has to be thrown away because it just doesn't fit something. So it's not something that people like. Okay, so how then do we actually foster design dispositions and design thinking? Sometimes I think you need to establish your comfort zone. You need to be aware of yourself. What kind of person are you? Are you the kind, if you're not the kind that can take like super lots of change, then do your tinkering slowly and be a realist, because you work in a context. You can't go and fight your whole policy or fight the curriculum and say, for example, like it's pointless to say that you oppose online learning because in the COVID-19 situation, there's no choice. If you don't do online learning, you can't even continue education. You need to be a realist. Some things you have to accept, but then you also have to be a dreamer. You must be willing, but how do you be the two, balancing when that's what I think a designer sometimes is the challenge. You do small scale tinkering. What can you change? But what can you, don't go wreck everything and cause, because whatever you do has some consequences on students. Sometimes you are ready, your students are not ready. It's not that you cannot be very innovative in your teaching, but your students are not ready. So you have to bring them slowly to change the culture. So that's part of being a good educational designer too. You don't just go do things and, especially if, students, there's some sensitivity. They need to feel, you need to motivate them by helping them succeed. But sometimes if you're too innovative, they might not end up doing very well, and that demotivates them too. So you don't want that sort of situation. You want to bring them slowly. You should seek design partnerships, because what we found in our research is that if you put an older teacher who is very experienced, who knows the students and all that, and you put her, but she's very scared of technology. You put them with a younger teacher who is very good with technology, the two works very well, because the newer ones will know what to do, but the older ones will know how to advise and say, hey, if you do this, the students are going to be like not taking it well and all that. So that sort of partnerships are useful. So seek design partnerships, because sometimes designing lessons, again, can be very tough if you're doing it yourself, but seek the partnerships that can, and draw upon institutional support, especially in universities. There's teaching and learning centers. There's people who are willing to help you to sit down and design. But I think the issue we find is that, well, many lecturers do not come seek help. They will struggle themselves and they say, I can't do this. But there's support there. Why did you not come? So I think a lot of times lecturers prefer to struggle themselves. I don't know why. Maybe that's what lecturers are. But do draw upon any kind of institutional support that you have. Yep. So I think that's what I have for today. So yep, you might want to think about and discuss, what are some challenges that you yourself might have in terms of design thinking and design dispositions? What are some ways to overcome this in your own context? Yep. Thank you very much. That's all I have to present today. And I can take questions or discuss now.
Thank you very much, Joyce. You've covered a huge amount of terrain. Thank you so much. I think what we'll do is we'll take some questions. We're sort of running out of time, but I think it would be quite useful to kick off. Can we maybe kick off with Eva? You said you were messing up your students and so on. So in some ways you agree with Joyce, but I think you have some, because you're a teacher yourself, and in some ways you trying to implement, kind of similar ideas in a different context.
So I work both as a professor at the university and also as a teacher in lower secondary education. So I have the possibilities then to try things out without this kind of I could co-design with myself and then do things, discuss with my students and then try it out with my pupils at the lower secondary school. But my question is, as a teacher, there's a lot of change enforced on us as teachers. There are new curriculums, new systems all the time. And so my question is how to keep the teachers motivated. So, and then for to be brave in failing forward and trying to change their ways of teaching.
I think in my experience, with working in a school, the support has to come up from the top.
Yes,
I mean, there are some teachers who are very motivated, they will do it, but usually it's more successful if the top, gives some kind of endorsement. So in what I did in the school, I think the principal herself was personally involved in all the professional development session. So she gave them time. So she carved out time in the curriculum for them to do such things and allowed them to implement, of course, but she set the parameters in the sense that they do not take students they don't do that kind of experimentation on students who are preparing, for exams. Like in Singapore, there's in primary 6, they have a very important school leaving exam. So you don't do that sort of experimentation with that group of students, but you do it maybe with, at the lower levels or certain levels where they are not pressured in that sense. So
and then you
that
keep
allows
the parents happy
teachers,
as well.
not really. I mean, yeah, in a sense, but it's not fair to pressure those students because they have other
That's true.
things to work on.
Thank you very much. It's really complex to succeed in this, but it's also very important. And also, as Eric said, do we need the provocation for change? Yes, and always we need that because it's really important to have this meta reflection all the time about your teacher practice. Thank you.
I think Fabienne needs to will be leaving us shortly, but before you go, Fabienne, I think you have a comment to make or questions to ask.
No, I really don't. Just thanks Joyce, and thanks Design Literacy. It's always a pleasure. I'm so sorry I have to leave. It's still 4 o'clock in Brazil. We have classes, so enjoy the discussion.
All the best, and I hope you'll be able to implement some of the ideas in your classes today. So,
yes, for sure.
And what we need to do is to collect some information so we can calculate whether you are successful or not. Karen Grass, come in, join us. Ask the question.
Okay. My speaking English is not very good, but I wrote the question.
Okay.
I like to make my indoor classes very dynamic. And I don't know how to transfer that dynamic activities into this new platform, online classes. So what would be your suggestion to me? For me?
Yeah, so I think this is the same problem. We've been working with an institution in Singapore in performing arts. So that's the same problem with the dance teachers. So the first thing I think you have to recognize that there are certain things that has to be done in a professional setting. So for example, like the dance, what they need to do with certain space in the dance studio, it's not possible to replicate in the home, because that's, if everyone's like in the home, that's not possible. So you have to think about what's possible, not possible, but within what's possible, what can you do in the context that they are to replicate what's most interesting there? Can you rethink the way that the same skills can be practiced, but in a different way. So I think it's with skill-based practice. But of course, the online part, what the teachers have found is that it's very good for strengthening concepts. So if you have opportunities to have a blended mode, like some of your classes are in the actual classroom and then some are online, then use the online part to strengthen the students' conceptual thinking and reflection. Whereas then you can focus on the skill-based things when you go into the, classroom where you have the professional part. But the thinking is done in the online segment. And then when they go to the class, they can better integrate the thinking with the doing in the class.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have two more questions, and then we need to wrap up this. I have lots of questions, but I would like to bring other people in. Ursula, you've read the book, and you've discovered actually Joyce, and invited Joyce for this talk. And I imagine so, you would have some of the questions actually from what you've read. By the way, you are able to, everyone, you can download the chapter of the book for free. So if it doesn't work for you, get in touch with us. But if you get to the event page, there's a link to it. You should be able to download the chapter that Joyce has been using the book as a base for her talk today. Ursula.
What?
You've read the book.
Yeah.
You've been working with the teachers yourself, and you've introduced you tried to introduce some of the design thinking principles with the teachers. And in some ways you had a success, in other ways it was a complete failure. But in what ways, your experiences are similar or different from what Joyce has described today?
Well, I think Joyce has expand the ideas and include more new ideas in relation to the book. So I think it was very, very interesting talk and very inspiring also. But what about the question of Raúl Valdez question? Raúl, do you have a question?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I just felt what type of infrastructure you think is needed to teach design thinking. I feel that technology, in a way, you need to require sometimes to teach Python, and maybe that's too much, but you need some type of environment, technologically wise, like a Google Drive, Microsoft. There's many tools that standardization, in a way, could be a good thing to teach design thinking. In design thinking, you use Google Drive to collaborate while building these ideas. But I don't know. I feel that when you start building technology, you start using other tools that require an environment in order to our students practice and bring it to life. So for me, it's all about practice as doing, and in a way you need an environment to have that. What do you think could be a good environment for teaching design thinking technologically wise? These are the technology tools that we need. These are the best ones, infrastructurally wise as well. Our students need to get to a place where they can find a knowledge base as FAQ. I don't know, more around those type of.
Yeah, I think you're talking about more because design thinking is pretty wide, depends on what subject area that you're applying it to. So for me, I'm teaching teachers design. So the kind of lesson design they do, I don't think they really need lots of technology or infrastructure. But if, let's say, you were teaching design thinking in a STEM kind of context, especially the maker spaces and all that, I think in that context, definitely you need the proper maker space, the tools, and the 3D printers and that sort of thing for students to create the products. but that's a different way of applying design thinking.
Yeah, I'm trying to do like that, like trying to make it more like IDEO that brings the product to life and have like all the technology and not only like kind of the 3D printing, but servers and all that. That's my idea, but starting small.
Yeah, you may, but I think we all have constraints in terms of context. So the more resources you need, I mean, for infrastructure you want, the more resources there are. So again, that is a design problem for the teacher. If you can't have all those resources, then what will be maybe free resources, or what will be the best way to set up with the minimal resources? So I believe that if you're talking about STEM makerspaces type, probably students need some ideation tools. They also need those physical tools depending on what they're doing. So there might be the basic workshop tools that are needed. But if let's say in a COVID situation and you really can't get to the makerspace, then what are the things that can be used in a home space that they can have easy access to, that you can do it? And how do you change the requirements of the products that they are designing to still meet your lesson requirements in terms of the kind of skills you want them to learn, but also be able to be doable in a home that's outside the workshop? I think that's the challenge, and that really has to do with your understanding of like content, the essence of it. I think that's very challenging for teachers.
Thank you. Yeah, it's around that, like how to bring on the science and have like a empathy drive that science and technology alignment and design thinking behind that. Thank you. Yeah, it's all around like what you're building and the required infrastructure of what you're working in. That if you're teaching design, is completely different set of tools and infrastructure.
Yeah, so I don't think your problem is really the infrastructure, but more of how do you envision the change in the kind of lesson activity that you're going to get students to do, and how do you convert it so that it's doable outside a workshop space if you can't access that?
It's why I'm teaching like the STEM type of subjects like Excel, try to also bring the design thinking to the process with infrastructure. Like, yeah, but thank you. Makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Raul. That was really interesting, and thank you for sharing with us, your personal experiences, what you're trying to do, because that's why we're trying to have these discussions. It's about to have one article or topic, and then we can discuss from our personal experiences in relation to the topic. So that's why it's these discussions are quite important. But I'm going to close this discussion, and we might bring you again, Joyce, sometimes in the future, because there's so much to be covered, and I think there's interest around unpacking many of these ideas that you have shared with us today. But let's move on, and Ursula, would you mind tell us what's going to happen next coming month, and we'll try to close this session down, and we will welcome you next month again.
Of course,
Ursula.
Of course. Thank you so much, Joyce, again for your talk. And let me share my screen. It is disappear. Okay, that is well. In our next talk, we will address a topic less covered in our talk cycle: design literacy for company managers and leaders. Gonzalo Castillo will reflect on the need to educate the company decision makers in design approaches to generate human-centered innovations. We will wait for you on Tuesday, November 2nd, at our usual time, that is 3 p.m. Central European Time and 11 a.m. in Chilean time. Okay.
And we do have just to let you know, we do have a speakers line up until 2022. Nevertheless, if you do come across interesting articles or book chapters, do get in touch with us and let us know, because we would like to bring those authors in, to discuss the ideas with us. And I think it's important to bring, is to actually source, interesting kind of topics, from variety of people who join us. So, for example, we had Jorge Fascara join us, and he was discussing an article which was written 20 years ago. And what was really interesting, 20 years later, he actually thought that the situation is actually worse than it used to be 20 years ago. So, it doesn't really matter when the article has been written. It's about the ideas that are expressed in those articles, in those books, in the chapters. And I think the ideas that are key for us to discuss. And thank you very much, everybody. We are sorry we could not have a longer discussion, but we hope to have it next time again. And Liv, would you like to take us off?
I just want to thank everybody, and I think we have put some interesting topics on the agenda, and I'm very much looking forward to see you the coming first Tuesdays in the month, every month. So bye for now, and have a nice evening or morning or whatever it is. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And thank you, Yasmin, for doing the interpretation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.